Welcome to the Sports Innovation Institute podcast, located inside the School of Health and Human Sciences at IUPUI in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm your host, Travis Smith, a proud sport management alum, adjunct faculty member, and associate editor of the Sports Innovation Journal here at IUPUI. On this podcast, we look to highlight the innovative practitioners and scholars in sports to learn and design think the future of the industry together. Thanks for listening to the Sports Innovation Institute podcast. All right, thanks for being on the IUPUI Sports Innovation Institute podcast. Today, I am joined by our co-authors of one of our accepted articles called Innovating Youth Tournament Schedules to Minimize School Absenteeism, an Exploratory Study. I'm joined by Dr. Chris Chard, professor in the Department of Sport Management at Brock University, and Daniel Wigfield, PhD candidate at the University of Waterloo. So thank you, gentlemen, for both being on the podcast. Let's start it with really just asking if you can summarize what the problem is you were trying to solve with this study, and maybe even start with the conversation that was had in the car heading to a tournament that seemed to really spark this whole paper.
Sure, I'll jump on that one. So, I mean, the genesis, I have two boys who have played hockey, rep hockey, for their whole lives. And, basically, we were lucky to be part of a really good organization. And sort of our expectation was always that we were going to be playing Friday, Saturday, and then, hopefully for a championship on Sunday. And so, when we were, you get to spend a lot of time with your kids and your colleagues and friends. So I was driving to this tournament with my friend Devin Smith, who's with the NHLPA. And I remember, the kids were in the back and Devo just said, hey, listen, at least we have a chance to win this. Imagine being one of those teams that, you're not going to be playing on Sunday. And it just sort of, that's kind of genesis of the study. It's sparked. And I was like, I wonder how big of an issue this really is. Like anecdotally, it's like, yeah, we all miss school on Friday to go play in tournaments, but is it a big deal or not? So that was the genesis of it. And we just started, I touched base with Dan and we just started digging at the numbers just to sort of start scratching at it a little bit to see what the issue was. And, we were sort of blown away by how big the numbers were when it all sort of shook out.
So for us, we're kind of off the beaten path, so to speak. And so if we were going away to tournaments and stuff, like you're guaranteed to miss school every Friday to go up towards Toronto, because that's a 4-hour drive in and of itself. And when I started thinking about when Chris presented the idea, it was more of like, yeah, no, that my parents were always taking off. One of them was always at least taking off work, and then you're always missing school. So like, and thinking back over 10 years, like that's a lot of school days and work days missed for hockey.
Yeah. Do you think that there was just not much thought put into how these tournaments are scheduled, or it just seemed kind of as the accepted and traditional norm that people just didn't think to change because hockey is such a popular sport there and is maybe ingrained in the culture?
Well, for a lot of it has to do is like what I would say would be with like just the traditional way of doing things. Like a lot of these minor hockey organizations that put on these tournaments, they're run by volunteers and they're however many years old, and that's just how they do it. You have to start on Friday and get out of there by Sunday. And a lot of it has to do with the ice time availability. And it's just never like at least popped into my mind. I'm sure it's never popped into the minds of many organizers. I wonder if like we could change this up, and like what would be the response if we did Saturday through Monday type of thing. Unfortunately, for like the more elite levels, it's going the other way, where like tournaments are starting on Thursday now. So now you're missing potentially 2 or 1.5 days of school.
Yeah, listen, if I jump in, I just think, to your question, Travis, I think honestly, it's just the way things have always been done. I mean, tournaments started on Friday and they went through to Sunday, and that was just the way it always was. And I think that's not just a hockey thing. I think that's, every sport. And, you rewind the clock a little bit and it was, casual Friday. Everything Friday was just more of a relaxed day. And I think the idea of missing a Friday was less of an issue than missing a Monday, where Monday was the start of the work week, right? And, I think that maybe is just something culturally that we've kind of gotten used to. But the reality is, I don't know, there's no difference between a Monday and a Friday in my job. So, there's no difference really in many people's roles. So really the days shouldn't matter. It's just, it's just the way things have always been done.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the purposes of the study list in the paper. You had a couple of purposes. So one, it seems like you really wanted to explore to what extent the participation in elite youth hockey resulted in avoidable absences. But what was kind of the second purpose as kind of what you guys were trying to help with this paper?
Well, I guess like we needed to sort of do purpose number one to see if there was even an issue. If it turned out that there was only 25 school days missed, then, quite frankly, no harm, no foul, right? But where we sort of came into thinking, well, geez, like if there's a problem, I mean, part of, I think, our job and as innovators in sport, we're sitting to say, well, what's the solution? Are there any workarounds that we can help to make this better? If there's an issue, let's see if we can make it better. And again, I got to go back to that original conversation with Devo in the car. And he just sort of said, I wonder why, it was just off the cuff. I wonder why they don't do this Saturday to Monday. And you code up again. You're like, well, maybe, is there any meat on that bone? So let's start digging. And again, so the second purpose was like, given the fact that the first purpose, produced that there's lots of kids missing school on Friday, then secondly, well, let's see if we flipped it, how would that change? And, that's where we came up with the relatively large numbers that, lots of avoidable school days could be mitigated if you just flip the day of the tournament back by one.
Yeah. And what was, so the idea, I think in the paper, it says, goal was to move the tournament schedule Saturday to Monday, as you mentioned. So is the idea that less teams would be playing on that Monday because the tournament would be kind of going in? Is that like why there'd be so many less absences based on moving it to Saturday, Monday? Is that correct?
Well, yes, because like a traditional tournament, like from a Friday to Sunday, you start your round robin play on Friday, and then you continue it on Saturday. And then ultimately, like if you make the playoff round, so whether it's semifinals or finals, there's only a couple teams left on the Sunday, but everyone essentially had to miss Friday school because the round robin started then. If you started on the Saturday, kids can complete their school day. They go to the tournament, they start the Saturday, and then ultimately it's the 2 or 4 teams that are staying the Monday. So right there, you mitigate a lot of school days missed.
And I think mentioned in the paper, although I know it's not the intended purpose, was how innovative thinking remains slow or is often opposed in tradition-bounded industries such as sport. Is that go back to your you guys' answer about just that's the way it's always been done, or why is that, and what is the barrier that maybe as sport administrators or youth sports specifically, how do we just get by that, and how can we actually put innovative solutions into practice?
Well, listen, I'll jump into that. I mean, I guess I would say tradition-bound industries, like people don't like change, right? I think inherently as human beings, we also say, it's okay, it's going okay. And so I would say on one level, I would be surprised if the magnitude of this challenge, people even know. Like I think we say in the paper, anecdotally, it's like, yeah, you missed Friday. Well, but when you add that up by myriad teams over multiple tournaments, we only did a sample as well of 100 of the 300 tournaments that ran, right? So like, and this is just hockey in one province. I mean, when you extrapolate this out, it's a massive number, but that I probably don't even think people will even recognize is a big number, right? So, it's not a hockey specific thing where we love the game. We love the sport, right? And I just think, we're looking to sort of tweak it to make it better. Volunteer-based organizations, it's run a certain way forever. It's in all likelihood, there's an Excel spreadsheet that has a tournament schedule, and you just sort of cut and paste and roll it forward year over year because why recreate the wheel? So it's the challenge is to sort of get people to think a little bit outside the box and say, okay, you know what? Hey, what if we did move it to Saturday, Sunday, and Monday tournaments? Like, what would be the impact? Well, on a school impact, it would be great. Would the hotel people care? Probably not. I don't know. Would the ice scheduling people care if they're, they're filling up their sheets of ice on Mondays now for final games instead of Fridays? I don't know. It seems in many ways to be a wash, but it's just a matter of, I think, getting the information out there that, hey, you know what, this may be a very simple change to make a very big impact.
And we say in the paper there that like youth sport organizations, or like just sport organizations in general, are open to change, but it's usually more of like the process line. So maybe it's stuff like going to online registration, or like streamlining certain things to free up time for the volunteers that typically run the organizations. So, but taking that step to change, like some of these tournaments have been going on forever, and to change like what they feel is a fundamental thing, the scheduling, is could be very difficult and like uncomfortable thing to do.
Hey listeners, a quick message and then we'll get right back to the interview. I wanted to quickly tell you that the Sports Innovation Journal is now accepting submissions. If you have or are looking for a place to publish your innovative thoughts and studies on the sports industry, then please consider the Sports Innovation Journal. We are an open access journal, and our target audience is the practitioner looking for answers to the questions and problems in their job, and we want to attract and publish researchers that are identifying and studying those questions and problems. If you are interested in learning more about the journal and wanting to submit or sign up to be a reviewer, then visit the link in the episode notes or email Dr. David Pierce, the editor and director of the Sports Innovation Institute, at dpierce3@iupui.edu, dpierce3@iupui.edu. Now let's get back to the interview. Yeah, and I think the one thing that the audience might not be aware of is just how big the Ontario Hockey Federation is. 300 tournaments. Did that sort of make it the perfect setting for this particular study so that you could have so much access to data?
For sure. So the Ontario Hockey Federation is like the biggest provincial governing body under the Hockey Canada umbrella, and it covers a huge part of the province. And a thing that we should note is like we only sliced it off at boys hockey. Like there's still a whole division of girls hockey that wasn't covered. So the number's even bigger.
You talk about moving things into a spreadsheet and schedules. Can you kind of talk about the methodology and then also how you collected and analyzed the data? So what data did you get it? How did you get it? And then really, how did you kind of formulate this whole search process and research process?
One of the things I was just going to piggyback on what Dan was saying from the last question, then go into this one. I mean, the reality is maybe this study 20 years ago, we probably couldn't even have done it because access to information was so much less readily available, right? So the beauty now is, the internet's this great equalizer. So most tournaments post up their schedules. So, it was a very labor intensive and manual process, but we would go on and, we'd punch up a tournament and, we would then go into each division. You copy and paste out the divisions and you paste it into an Excel spreadsheet. And then, like the example that we have in the paper, this was just one division of a tournament, but you basically do it at the back end where you get the results. And so you can see, well, team A played team B on Friday, and then team C played team D on Friday. And you could just go through, and then you can basically see a very exemplar, maybe 8 teams started out. They played the round robin games on Friday, Saturday, and 4 of them went on to the semifinals on Sunday. So you do that for every single tournament and every single division within the tournament and every single, level within triple, double, and single. And, you just end up with this massive Excel spreadsheet that you're managing that's got all the data in it. So where we didn't sort of make a specific cutoff to say, hey, these are the 100 tournaments we want to do. Like some of it chose itself because these were the 100 tournaments that seemed to best convey their websites had the most, informative information, right? There's some other tournaments where it's like, I don't know, I couldn't tell who played on Friday. Dan couldn't tell who played Saturday, Sunday. So, they some of them just didn't make the cut in the tournament because we just think their information wasn't as readily available.
Or another thing, and this just goes with like a thing with like community sport organizations, is like halfway through the tournament, like the scheduling update would stop for whatever reason. Like, so they wouldn't have complete results posted. So you could see up to what happened on Saturday afternoon, but then that was it. so we couldn't use them.
So let's take this isn't really a spoiler, but the number of avoidable missed classes. Can you guys share with us, and it's obviously in the paper, but how many avoidable absences were actually found in your study?
Well, I got the chart here. I mean, basically on the sample of 100 tournaments, we had 2,510 teams that played Fridays and did not advance to play on Sunday. So sort of have these avoidable school absences, which then extrapolates out if there's 17 kids on a team to 42,670 days that were, avoidably missed by just, if we push the schedule back by one day.
Yeah, that number is just incredible. When I read it, it really stuck out. And I think those listening and then reading the paper will be kind of amazed to see just how avoidable this is. And then it almost makes you think, why wouldn't we try to move the schedule around? Because it just makes so much sense once you actually see the data.
Yeah, listen, I couldn't agree more. I mean, listen, there's certain business processes where you'd look and say, well, it's a cost of doing business. In order for us to do X, we have to do Y. So like in a different way, hey, listen, if we want to be able to have hockey tournaments, kids have to miss school on Fridays. Well, if it was that absolute, then we would sit here and say, geez, this is just a big number that is the cost of doing business. But to your point, Travis, I mean, the reality is, again, if you move it back one day, it doesn't have to be the cost of doing business. It's more just this innovation. It's a new way of thinking. And, that's the interesting thing about the study, right? Like, I go back to your innovation question. I mean, I laugh because at class, I often talk about, sports, the growth of sports. And I remember in the late 70s and, the first all sports TV station came out and people were like, what, who's going to watch sports all day? Right. And you look at it now, it's almost laughable with all the content that's out there. Right. And you can get outside of sports and someone would be like, say, what? You're going to call a stranger to come and pick you up in a taxi cab? Like, that's crazy. Right. But Uber has revolutionized. It's just a different way of thinking. And so, I'm not sitting here professing that Dan and I and Luke have created the next Uber, but, so innovations don't have to be massive things. It could be just a small tweak. And this small tweak, innovative scheduling, could save a lot of school days and a lot of work days. Because we didn't even talk about that in the paper, but it's a natural extension for us to cover off, in a future paper is, how many work days are missed? What's the impact on the GDP with people taking holidays or just skipping work to go to their kids' hockey tournaments?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that exact point that you just ended on. As a working parent myself of two young boys, I was just thinking, here in the States, we have youth sports as incredibly popular here, kind of spread out against multiple sports, but I don't know how you can just miss work so much to go to tournaments. And yes, you'd have the economic impact of the hosting area, but right. You're not asking about shrinking the economy there because you're just moving the dates. And so I did think that's a great study to see how many parents are actually using PTO, like paid time off, or taking unpaid time off just to go to these tournaments. And so that I think is a natural extension for either you all or maybe someone else that gets inspired from reading the paper. And I did have a question as far as we mentioned you only studied the boys tournaments. Do you get the impression, obviously you didn't run the numbers, but being from there, you probably have an idea, is the girls tournament structure very similar as far as how they structure tournaments, so that maybe one would assume that it is kind of just as prevalent that they're missing all these classes?
I would say yes. It's very, they run very similarly, but the other thing too is like one of like the most popular and like fastest growing sports up here is girls hockey. So there's potential for that number to be bigger.
Yeah, 100%. Travis, actually the interesting thing, the girls hockey system is quite tournament based. So, and I can only, would be anecdotal for me, but I would say, I have friends whose daughters play play hockey. And whereas boys, you might do 3. When I was with the different minor hockey organizations, we would technically do 3 tournaments, and then you could get a 4th if you put in an application to sort of override, and then you'd have championship weekends and stuff. But a lot of the girls teams will do 6, 7, 8 tournaments in a season. So it seems like they're a little bit even more tournament based. So yeah, their number could be on a per player basis. I think the absolute number, just because there's more boys playing, I think might still be higher for the boys side, but on a per player basis, I think it could be hugely impactful on the girls side.
So one thing I was thinking is, a lot of this podcast is geared towards practitioners, and as far as the audience, we want them to actually put this in motion. So Dr. Chard, I'll kind of leave this one to you to start off. Is if you could choose who listens to this that can make actionable changes, whether it's hockey or just any youth sport, who are we targeting this to who are the decision makers?
Well, I would think, I don't think this is a top down, like a Hockey Canada initiative coming down to the OHF and down. I think it's kind of a grassroots, it's a bottom up, I believe. And I think, I think the message here is to, CSO, different community sport organization presidents, and, maybe, and it doesn't have to be hockey. It could be volleyball, basketball. It could be, any of the sports. But I think that's really the message to, I think that's the target audience for them to say, again, I never thought of this. This isn't a judgment. I hadn't thought of it until Devo just sort of threw it out there, and I'm like, that's actually an interesting idea, right? So, I think that's the audience, and I think another natural next study then is to do a qualitative study, interviewing some of these presidents and saying, hey, in light of this paper, what do you foresee as some of the challenges for implementing such a change, or see maybe have a few organizations do the changes. Hey, in a retrospective, what do you think? Like, would you go back to the old way of doing things, and why? Or are you guys pretty committed to this change? So I think that's the audience. It's these presidents of the community sport organizations.
When I was reading this, because I work in college athletics, and one thing we always hear about in March Madness, obviously we didn't have one this year with COVID-19, but college basketball season in general for men's and women's is one of the only sports that actually runs into multiple semesters in college here in the United States. And there's always talk about missed class time and why we should push men and women's basketball into a 1-semester sport. And so that they'd have a lot less missed class time spilling into multiple semesters. So it's always on my mind of these missed classes. So I really enjoyed the paper. I guess the final thing I'll ask is, what is kind of both of your research interests moving forward? Is there any projects that you're looking to get at this year that maybe we can and promote the idea a little bit here?
Well, for me, I'm in the process of collecting data for my dissertation, and I'm basically looking at I'm working with a newer hockey organization in Southern Ontario here, and just kind of understanding how they're building their institution. They're doing it a little different way from the traditional model that's been put forward by Hockey Canada. So looking at how you build an institution at the grassroots level, and the challenges of that is what I'm focused on in the moment.
Sounds innovative.
Yes, they are. I'm sure they would love to hear that they were innovative thinkers.
That's right. Maybe a fit for the journal. But I would say 2 things, Travis. For me personally, I'm doing a lot of stuff on resource allocation and where organizations best utilize their resources, and specifically in terms of prioritizations, is kind of not everything's created equally, right? So I'd like to that's where my kind of research is going, and a lot of my focus is on youth sports or amateur sports. So I've done a lot of stuff on the intercollegiate space up here in Canada. So I certainly would like to continue with that. But I want to just go back 1 second to something you'd mentioned before. I think as we close up this last study, one of the interesting things, we all assume anecdotally that a change may be just for these school days, which absolutely is a factor. But we make an assumption. I don't know, it'd be interesting maybe to interview hotel operators and say, I don't know, would you like to have more people staying in your hotels on Sunday night versus Friday, which is a more of a dead night? Or restaurant owners, right? Like I would have to make an assumption or a best guess that, even without a tournament, a lot of restaurants would be busy on a Friday night, right? They may not need as much extra business on a Friday night. On a Sunday, it may be quieter anyway, but now let's say you have a whole bunch of people staying in a town they need to eat. So, sometimes I think some of these things we sort of take at, anecdotally, they need a little research to sort of dig in and see, what can be innovative, right?
That's an incredible point. In college, I actually worked at a hotel in downtown Indianapolis, and you could tell that there's certain days that they actually need people to stay there. And I think you hit it right on the head. Is that'd be an incredible idea to actually bring in the community of businesses as well to kind of see what would be economically the best for everyone involved. And all that information being sent to the decision makers could make, trying something new a little less scary, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, hey, I totally agree. Totally agree. And it's interesting because you've walked in the shoes, right? You've seen it. And you've mentioned like college sports down in the States is huge. Sports in the States. I mean, I love that. I go and visit our friends in the States, and, we went to their little town, and they had on a Friday night, they had a huge basketball game, and we watched the girls JV team play, and there was, 300 people in the gymnasium. I was like, man, this is amazing. Like, it's such an awesome sports culture in the States. And, we have a great sports culture up here as well in Canada. So I think, just to be able to sort of put these pieces together and help to run it, the very last thing that Dan, Luke, and I would ever want to profess and influence is that we're not asking or professing to reduce these sport experiences in a million years. Like, there's such value in it. We all did them as kids, and the sporting experience is incredible and incredibly valuable for kids in their learning environment, their learning education, and their experiential education, right? So what we would always want to be crystal clear, we love tournaments. We love the fact that they're competitive. We love the fact that, there's winners and losers, and we love the fact that they so many kids get to take part in them. What we would like is that maybe if all things being equal, if you could make a move and they don't have to miss school, why do it?
I appreciate it. I think our readers and our listeners are really going to enjoy the paper. And for those listening, the paper is here in the show notes, so you can download it. And I really just want to thank you both for being on the IUPUI Sports Innovation Institute podcast.